Welcome to the Anxious Love Coach podcast, a place for creating meaningful, conscious, secure, long-term partnerships. Here, we talk relationship anxiety and creating healthy, magnetic dynamics within partnership to help you feel confident and alive within committed partnership. My name is Natalie Kennedy, and I'm your host. I'm a relationship anxiety coach and meditation teacher. I've worked with hundreds of clients battling anxiety, and after experiencing extraordinary shifts in my own healing relative to partnership, now combine my lived personal experience and professional training to help others trust themselves within relationship and in their lives. I've been to the edge and back with my now husband from relationship anxiety and come out confidently to the other side. I want to pass the tools I've learned along to you to help you trust yourself in relationships and also create magnetic, hot dynamics with your partner. I believe lots of mainstream relationship advice today can make us anxious and dissatisfied. So let's jump in and normalize challenges that modern relationships and real people go through while also giving you tools to trust yourself, drop the shame, and alchemize your messy, twisted relational truths into profound inner wisdom and aliveness. If you haven't yet, be sure to join my communities over on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Anxious Love Coach. You can also request a 30-minute relationship anxiety assessment with me depending on availability, or ask me a question over on my website at www.anxiouslovecoach.com. I've also got a wonderful relationship anxiety meditation available to you as thanks for subscribing to my email list. Thanks for being here and enjoy this episode. Hey, welcome back to the podcast. Thanks for being here. I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. We just had an IKEA open in our little town of Envigado here in Colombia. Press and I went the other day and we had a marvelous time. On the one hand, I know IKEA probably will not benefit all the local artisans here. And so there's that. But also I miss my home in the United States. So it was nice to go. We just had a really, really wonderful date and I'm just feeling very grateful. And I was thinking about what to talk about this week, and I thought I would share a story with you. Now, you may have heard me talk in my first episode ever, how I broke free from relationship anxiety, about a time where I was in Austria in the mountains with my teacher named Steffi Price, and I talked about having this huge epiphany, like aha moment about my relationship that caused me to ultimately quit my wishy-washiness about my partner for good. The truth is, I had good reasons to be afraid of commitment. And if you're listening to this and you can relate, you probably do too. My partner at the time, when my relationship anxiety was at its worst, was in full-blown workaholism mode in his family business. And he used pornography as his coping mechanism. I didn't even know about it at the time, but I'm sure my anxiety was connected to that. And at the same time, I had all sorts of relational trauma. I had parents that had been in 3 marriages each, and I genuinely, it's hard for me to see this now, but back then, I genuinely believed that there was something in my genetics that suggested I wasn't made for commitment. I was a free spirit through and through, was never meant to settle down. And yet I stayed in a committed relationship. I just would never take it a step further. With both of us having all these skeletons in our closet, the result was a dynamic that contributed to relationship anxiety. It was immensely dissatisfying. I was always trying to make my partner more perfect in every way. The way he walked, the way he talked, how much money he made, but also with a certain degree of ease so that he could give me the right kind and amount of attention that I wanted, the way he ate, the way he did business and conducted himself in every interaction with his parents or mine or his friends or mine. All of this exhausting effort to make him perfect so that I could make sure in advance that I would have a perfect divorce-proof marriage and therefore finally live up to my own made-up standard of a perfect life. And the result of that is he was feeling like he was never good enough for me. And he continually affirmed my lack of belief in him by acting out in these ways like stonewalling and constant defensiveness. So it wasn't just like, oh, I had relationship anxiety, but my partner was perfect. No, we had issues, self-fulfilling our own worst prophecies and bringing out the worst in one another. Maybe some of you guys have relationship anxiety and your partner is perfect in every way. Well, I can't totally relate to that. Although my partner, I knew at his core was a good man, but I did manage to somehow bring out the worst in him and him and me. I'm going to talk about porn just for a second. It's not what this podcast is about, but I just feel like I should say it. And especially in a way, because Preston's not my podcast editor anymore, I feel like I can share even more with you. Although if you listen to this, it would be fine. I don't talk to him much about this now because I truly believe it's his business. But between me and you guys, to me, it's no wonder he turned to porn as an escape. I'm not condoning it. I'm actually really against pornography usage, but I also understand. Those women on the screen ask nothing of you. And contrast that to a girlfriend at the time, me, that was always squeezing the life out of him in every way and never letting him just be. You know, what relief it must have been from the pressure I'd been putting him under. I don't think his usage had all that much to do with me or his lack of love towards me, because honestly, he could have left, right? I don't even think it had anything to do with sexual satisfaction, because the stuff on the screen is never going to be like it is in real life. But I think he was just seeking relief. And it also made sense why he wasn't proposing, because I was squeezing the life out of him. And then when he didn't propose, it would just make me feel like he was failing in yet another way. And yet deep down, even though I wanted to be proposed to, I wasn't even sure I would say yes, which would explain his hesitation. It was a full cycle dynamic. Oh, it's honestly really sad. We had so many skeletons in each of our closets. And looking back, how things might have been different if I knew now what I knew then. But then I wouldn't be able to let you know how the extent of how bad things truly were at the time and how much we've made a turnaround. I won't act like we don't have any skeletons in the closet still, or like we have a perfect marriage. And honestly, I don't think you would find me relatable at all if I told you I had a perfect marriage. I do not. But I will tell you what's possible, because I've seen it in my own life, and it moves me to tears sometimes. I got really weepy writing out the script for this episode. I don't generally record without a script anymore. My episodes are much better with a script. Sometimes I go a little off, but in general, I stick to a script so I can be more concise. But while I was writing this, I got really weepy, and I just feel very grateful of how far we've come in the last almost 13 years. But again, I think I don't see that many people sharing how difficult it can be and the work that's often required inside of yourself, but also inside of a relationship to get the relationship that you want. And so that's why I share my process with you, or at least some snapshots from it. But I just want to let you know, if you're looking for a quick, easy fix, I ain't got that for you. What I'm going to share with you today is a story about an honest turning point in our relationship, but it was still just the beginning of an enormous amount of work. And I believe that if you want something amazing in your life, you're going to need to work for it. And I genuinely believe I have something amazing, but I had to work to get it. So let's go back to 2019. I was so overwhelmed with doubts about my relationship that I could barely function or work, for that matter. So I decided to just step away from my life for 3 weeks. I'm very lucky that at the time I was a yoga teacher running my own business. I barely broke even in that career, but I did have the luxury of running away for 3 weeks. And I headed over to Vienna, Austria. And within a few days, I got lonely and bored. So I headed to Salzburg and stayed in a hostel with 8 people per room. And prior to heading to Austria, I will admit I had a wandering eye with men. And I thought it might just be fun to flirt with men at the hostel, and I was hoping it would kind of give me some clarity. I'm not proud of saying this, but it is the truth. But surprisingly, and also to my relief, I found that by the time I arrived, I was actually completely disinterested in other men. It became clear to me that I didn't actually want to leave my relationship. I just needed to be in my own space for a while. But at the same time, I felt this pit of loneliness that was so deep that being in a hostel of partying people was totally grating to my nervous system. I needed connection, but I needed something, I didn't want anything surface level. But the reality is I probably wasn't a match for that because I was so ashamed and depressed and anxious, and I probably gave off a don't fuck with me face. Yeah, depression and anxiety sadly have ways of repelling people, I believe. And I kept thinking while I was at that hostel, what the hell am I doing here in Austria? I would sit on curbsides while cars would drive by, and I would just journal about feeling so lost, and I would have tears streaming down my cheeks. And then I would just walk aimlessly through the streets, and I would look up at the sun. And in hindsight, this aimless wandering was a starting point for my healing. I needed to remember who I was outside of my partnership because I had made our relationship the center focus of my life. And so if that wasn't going great, then nothing was going great. And at some point, I realized I needed a little more structure to my 3-week trip. I had actually showed up with no structure at all. I just figured I would fly by the seat of my pants and trust my intuition entirely. But at some point, I was like, okay, I need to know where I'm sleeping tomorrow night. So I found this website that sadly doesn't exist anymore to my knowledge. And it was just a database of retreat centers and offerings, in-person offerings in Austria. And I found one called Alpenhafen in Styria, Austria, and it just seemed like a house. So I emailed the website owner and I said, listen, I'm a huge effing mess. Can you take me in? And someone responded and said yes. And that woman's name was Steffi Price. God bless that woman. Anyway, it took me 4 or 6 hours, something like that, from Salzburg to get to Steiermark, Austria. And Steffi picked me up and drove me 20 minutes into her house in the mountains. And as soon as I arrived, the scent of her home suddenly reminded me of my grandparents' house in Russia, which I haven't been in over 10 years. And I had to immediately run to the bathroom to just start weeping with relief. And I can't even explain it. I think I somehow felt I had landed somewhere in my life where I was supposed to be. It was like the first time ever in years where I felt like I was on track. So that night, Steffi said, okay, I can offer you 3 meditation sessions per day. And I thought, great. I figured it was just going to be a group class, but with one person, with her just kind of talking at me. It sounded harmless enough. I was so wrong about that. And sure, there were occasionally some sessions like that where she was, guiding me through some yoga and some movement. I was shocked to find that what Steffi was going to be teaching me were practices that were partnered between her and I. I was not going to be able to hide. She was going to be digging into my soul because the things that she was teaching me were intimacy practices. And I don't mean intimacy like, her touching me or anything like that, although eventually that got added too, years later. But at the time, it was like meditative partnered dialogue. And I was going to be asked to dig into myself. Now, at this time in my life, I was desperate for relief, so I obliged, although I squirmed in her presence for the next 2 weeks. It felt like she could see everything inside me. I felt a mix of relief because there was nothing in me that surfaced that seemed to faze her or arouse judgment, but at the same time, she left no room for me to hide. And no room for me to hide from myself. And gradually, it started to dawn on me that I could see myself the way that she seemed to see me. With compassion, with curiosity and patience, and an unwavering sense of trust in my ability to climb out of my dark hole by myself. I was shocked that the more I saw myself this way, because it was a whole nother lens to look at life through, I started to also see my partner, who was then my boyfriend, that way too. I realized we were both victims of our own standards of perfection. both of us traumatized, both of us ruled by our shame. And while I had attempted to look accepting so as to not shame myself and him, because on some level I knew it was wrong, these were really surface level performances, attempts at acceptance, attempts at love, because inevitably with the right trigger, the resentment and the self-hatred would just come spilling out and eventually would target him, but it would also target myself. Only after I started to truly see and love myself as I was, did I start to have the capacity to really see and love Preston. There are a few main intimacy practices, or partnered meditations, I should say, that I did with Steffi. I wouldn't say there was one particular one that worked. 2 weeks of meeting 3 times a day to just get in my body and feel and express my emotions. I would rage, I would stew, I would wail, I would tremble in pain and fear, I would vent and entertain never-ending stories of my victimhood throughout my life. I would find myself confronted with the opportunity to grow and take responsibility, and I would turn it down. I did not want to look at myself in the face and take responsibility for my life. But surprisingly, it only took a week with Steffi out of the 2 weeks I was there for me to have a massive, massive breakdown. It happened during an exercise called consciousness exercise. Steffi learned it under a German teacher of hers, and his name was Christian Meyer. Now, the basic structure of consciousness exercise is this. One person who is an assigned sort of guide sits beside an assigned sort of meditator who's going to go inside of themselves. So you get 2 cushions and they both sit on cushions, and you kind of sit 90 degrees from one another. One person's going to guide and one person's going to kind of observe themselves and reveal and share. The goal of the guide is to guide your meditator down the layers of consciousness, starting with the meditator's thoughts down into their feeling bodies and then beyond into pure consciousness or spaciousness. Now, up until I learned this practice, I had never really accessed a point of spaciousness or stillness before. I had no reference point for what intuition and deep love was. I knew what attachment was. I knew what clinging was, but I didn't know what love really was. I was this big, tarry mess of triggered thoughts and sensations and intrusive thoughts, and I was constantly trying to fight or push down or panic about whatever I'm thinking, emotions I had no control over, and impulsive, reactive behavior on the outside. This was just who I thought I was at my core, and I spent endless amounts of energy trying to cover up who I thought I truly was, who was just this really pained person. But little did I know that in covering up my feelings, I was also covering my true self, which was love. So in consciousness exercise, the guide asks the question, what are you aware of? Over and over and over again, every 90 seconds or so for about 30 to 60 minutes, depending on what you have time for. The meditator, who is observing themselves, responds in the most concise way as possible after scanning themselves and noticing where their attention currently is. It might be something like, there's tension in my chest. I'm thinking about when this practice is going to end. My hips are on fire. Or I'm aware I'm thinking about a fight I had with my partner last week, and I'm aware that I feel anger and fear when I think about that. The guide would then echo this back to them, which I found to be wonderfully soothing and validating because it made me feel so seen. And then based on where the guide perceived I could go deeper into my experience, they might make a suggestion, which the meditator had the option as to whether to act on or not. This could be something like, maybe there's an emotion connected to that tension in your chest, and that can help you to fall deeper. Or they might say something like, maybe you can allow the anger and the fear to be there, and just give them space to be without needing to do anything about them. What I started to notice in consciousness exercise was how much I judged myself and my thoughts and my feelings constantly. It was like a way of life. No wonder I did that to my partner too. At least I didn't see it to this extent anyway, because sure, I had therapists that I was seeing that told me I'd being hard on myself, but I didn't believe them because I wasn't forced to sit down and watch myself torment myself over and over. I started to witness the constant should sounding thoughts that would come up over and over again. I started noticing these micro aversions I had to just allowing myself to be. Whenever I would feel something like anger, for instance, I would start to laugh awkwardly, worried it was going to make Steffi uncomfortable. So I'd try to cover it up by laughing or smiling. But then I would suffer inside because I'm trying to hide. I'm trying to pretend again. I can't just be. And Steffi, being the angel she was, she never, or she was just following the practice, I guess, but she never commented on my struggle. She would just witness me, and in witnessing me, she kind of let me witness myself and my own struggle and my desire to be seen, but also to hide. And then I would be embarrassed because then I would judge the fact that I'm so freaking judgmental. So I don't know about you, but I feel exhausted just remembering this. And eventually in the practice, I got exhausted trying to constantly hide how I was really feeling. And I also started to understand the futility of constantly trying to hide. My attempts at being perfect and doing the exercise perfect and being the perfect partner and trying to make my partner perfect and have a perfect life and a perfect marriage, none of that was working. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to be perfect, and I couldn't seem to convince people that I was perfect. Steffi saw right through it. I saw right through it. Nobody was judging, and I finally got tired of these attempts to pretend when it didn't even seem to do anything useful. So at some point, the exhaustion got to me, and I utterly broke down. I must have wailed like a baby for 30 minutes straight, nonstop. It was like decades and decades of grief came out of me about my parents' divorce, about the relationship that I thought I was going to have by now that I didn't have, the career that I didn't have that I thought I'd have, all of the disappointment that I never gave myself the option to really explore. And it was just coming out like buckets, so guttural tears, guttural pain, guttural wailing. And it didn't even feel like I was the one doing the crying. It's almost like I had this entity of grief and disappointment that had just always been there, waiting for me to give it permission to exist to the extent it was there, and for once, not need it to go away. I just had to get out of the way. And then after my 30-minute grief purge, something miraculous happened. It ended, as all things do. I reached the end of my grief for the time being. And it truly felt like a very cliche clouds parting in the sky moment. And for the first time in 3 years of experiencing debilitating anxiety and intrusive thoughts about my relationship, I felt relief. And that relief has stayed with me since that day. I felt love and appreciation for my grief. Oh, I'm getting chills just remembering this moment. I felt love and appreciation for all my grief and all my disappointment and all my anxiety and everything it had taught me and everything it had been leading me to feel and the depth it was asking of me. My tears seemed to have washed my eyes clean, and all of a sudden I could see my life situation more clearly. And bless that girl's heart from 2019, I immediately remember that I thought of Preston and I saw the two of us, these two flawed, hurting humans. And that love I felt towards myself and my pain and my grief, I suddenly felt towards him and towards his struggle. And I knew how incredibly difficult it was to own your shit and face yourself because I had just done it. So I quit judging him for his struggle. And from that moment on, I made a really sincere, humble effort to keep my eyes on my own paper. And for the first time in years, without all this anxiety just gripping my chest and my throat and my heart, for the first time, I felt love for my boyfriend. I saw how hard he was working, and it suddenly dawned on me that he was working that hard for me because he had a future in mind for us. It was almost like he'd been waiting, hoping for years that I would see and appreciate his efforts. I remember I started crying, but this time in gratitude. And I said out loud to myself, "That is an incredible man. I would be an idiot to leave." There's no context. I just said this out loud randomly while sitting in consciousness exercise. And Steffi, who honestly had just met me like 7 days prior, who was not invested in my decision either way. She just kind of sat there. Anyway, after the exercise was over, I called my boyfriend at the time, Preston, and I said, "Hey, I'm done wavering." And I told him that I was all in and I was ready to proceed in our relationship. And, he was skeptical at first, understandably. After all, I'd spent years oscillating between "I love you" and "I don't know if I love you." But within a couple years, I confidently made it clear that I wasn't wavering, and he proposed and we got married. Now, that is not the end of our story. I know some of you guys are in a position right now where you would feel so relieved to just make a decision and move forward, but just know that that's only the starting point. There was a ton of work to do after that. I feel like that moment was just the beginning. I was consciously choosing a messy, flawed partnership. But this was the unique mess that I wanted, and I stopped searching for a mess-free life. So life is still challenging, but the pain of having one foot out the door and hoping my partner is going to become perfect so that I can be perfect in choosing him is not one of these challenges. I found that the pain of indecision and the empty results of risk aversion are far worse than the pain of making a mistake and then trying to make a turnaround. So shortly after this time in Austria, our relationship got a lot lighter. I actually came home to California so excited to see Preston. I remember we went to the farm to pick strawberries. And I remember the lightness I felt in my heart, and I remember just feeling like I could see again. I saw Preston still battling his demons, and I found myself trusting that he could find his way out and affirming to him my belief in him. Over time, I started noticing him opening his heart to me more and more, especially over the years, and he became way more affectionate and considerate. And at some point, this was maybe 3-4 years ago, he had his own spiritual awakening, and he actually decided to come clean and quit porn and joined a men's group to hold himself accountable to become the best man he could be. This had nothing to do with me. I didn't pressure him to do this at all. He came to this all on his own, and honestly, I couldn't be more proud of him. But I know that just like I have my own struggle and like to have it be respected, I offer him that same grace. So our relationships had more tests and trials. It still does. But doubting the relationship, for the most part, is a thing in the past. I share this not to promise the same results to you, only to let you know that the clarity and love that you are seeking are on the other side of that really dark, messy stuff you don't want to look at within yourself. And you might need to spend a significant amount of time with it without conditions before it shifts. So, long story short, I started Anxious Love Coach shortly after this, maybe within a few months. And I got really hooked on consciousness exercise, and I asked my teacher, Steffi, to teach me. Because until then, I'd always just been the meditator, and she agreed. And I've been both continuing to practice and learn about consciousness exercise and share this exercise with my clients ever since. There's a couple more practices she shared with me, which also shaped my results, but I'll share those at another time. I'm actually going to be running group programs sometime next summer, probably in 2025 after my maternity leave, and I'll share the other practices with you. But I wanted to talk about consciousness exercise in particular today because it's just such a revolutionary, wonderful practice. Thank you, Christian Meyer, for creating it. And I wanted to also share this with you because I'm actually going to be hosting my last group of the year, and actually until the end of my maternity leave, which will probably be in May or June 2025. Whenever I feel ready to get back to work, then we'll start up again. And while most of my programs have always targeted relationship anxiety directly, I've been feeling called to specifically teach consciousness exercise in the context of partnership. I decided to take the plunge. So I wanted to make sure I tell you about it first. Starting October 24th, I'm opening up a women's group for 6 weeks, and it's called Anxious to Spacious, because that's kind of the progression I would like to take you from being very anxious to feeling clear and being able to see clearly and have an open heart and feel spacious inside of yourself. We're going to meet for 6 Saturdays on Zoom for 75 minutes to learn consciousness exercise. And we're also going to be, having sharing and discussion afterwards. So we're also going to explore how you can use this practice to improve your communication with your partner or just people if you're single. I'm also going to be sending you a PDF every week with some entertaining supplementary study material. And I'm also going to assign you a 5-person study group in your time zone so that you always have someone to practice consciousness exercise with outside of session. My strong recommendation is you meet with someone once a week for 30 minutes, at least, to practice. And that's it. I know a lot of people are tired of having to do like online courses and watch these long lectures and videos. So I wanted to make something very simple. We meet for 6 sessions. You have your homework to read and you just have someone that you practice with once a week. That's all the course is for 6 weeks. I want you to actually dive into the practice and feel nurtured and not burdened by a bunch of study material. I can't promise you're going to have a massive spiritual awakening in 6 weeks. Remember, I was at a retreat center completely isolated from the world. You're learning something while still having to live your life. So lower your expectations a bit. But I do feel confident that if you show up and practice, you're going to start to become more aware of your patterns and be well on your way to breaking them, because that is what having more consciousness does. There's only so much I can talk about on the podcast if you're struggling with relationship anxiety. I always tell my clients it's not about copying me and digesting my words. That can help you, but it's only so far you can go because it's still thoughts. I'm sharing my thoughts with you. I want you to go inside your body and find that place inside where you just get it. You get it on a deep body, cellular, somatic level, to the point where you don't need my words anymore. I want you to be able to move on with your life so that you can focus on putting some roots down and building something meaningful. Anyway, there's that. I'll put the link to Anxious to Spacious in the show notes. It's going to be a very simple program, but not easy. I recommend you show up to as many sessions as you can. I'll be recording some of it, but not all, because I'm going to be splitting my groups into breakout rooms on Zoom to practice consciousness exercise while I float around and supervise and guide the guides via chat. So some of it's going to be recorded, but to really do consciousness exercise, you're going to need to show up and meet with your study groups once a week. You're going to learn how to really see and be seen. If you have fears of intimacy, this is going to bring you right up against those. You're going to get better at listening and expressing yourself in a way that gets your partner to naturally want to listen to you. Honestly, consciousness exercise is such a game changer, and you get a lot of bang for your buck with it. One of my old clients who did both feet in, when I ran it as a group, it's a self-study course now, but there was a time when I ran it as a group, and she said this about consciousness exercise. It's really sweet. Consciousness exercise is now my best friend. I cannot go a week without feeling into my body and recognizing my emotions. Not only am I no longer scared of what's inside of me, I genuinely crave feeling everything. I now recognize the tightness in my chest, the unwell feeling in my belly, and the heaviness in my shoulders. They aren't enemies anymore. They're here to guide me deeper. Originally, I entered this course with the intention to learn more about healthy romantic relationships. I'm now coming out with a completely new relationship with myself and feeling more secure in myself than ever. I got tools I can and most definitely will work with, and a new level of consciousness accompanying me for the rest of my life. Words cannot describe the level of gratitude I'm feeling. And that's from Elena Young. Thank you so much, Elena. Consciousness exercise really can have that effect on you. Being able to access that place of spaciousness and love that comes from deeply seeing and knowing yourself is unmatched, and it makes you magnetic. I'd love to help you clear out all that unnecessary old gunk clogging up your view of your life and your partner. It's kind of like a faucet that hasn't been turned on in a while, and when you turn it on, it's just like black tar. But if you keep running it, it's going to eventually run clear. So if you'd like to join me for Anxious to Spacious, just click the link in my show notes. Also, just a heads up, if you're a student of Both Feet In, you get a discount because consciousness exercise is also shared in my self-study course. Just find the module that says coupon code In my opinion, one can only go so far doing consciousness exercise alone, at least in the beginning. It's best done with someone. After you've done it for a while, you'll kind of be able to play both sides of the guide and the meditator inside of yourself, and you can get to that place on your own. For me, I still do consciousness exercise because it's really nice to just surrender into one role, but you can eventually learn how to do it by yourself. But for now, offering that discount, if you're a Both Feet In student, by the way, is my incentive for you to come and join me in a group setting. Of course, if you can't, finances, time commitments, whatever, if you're not ready, that's okay too. The solo guided meditation variation I included in Both Feet In is better than nothing. But I still think that doing a guided meditation, you can still kind of hide in it in a way where you can't hide when you're in another person. And by the way, if you're curious and you're like, what's Both Feet In? It's my signature self-study course for relationship anxiety. I'll put the link in the show notes for that too if you're interested. Anyway, any questions, just let me know. You can shoot me a DM over on Instagram at Anxious Love Coach. And I'm a little tired. I've been doing a lot of marketing for Anxious to Spacious lately, so I'm going to take a little break. I'll probably take a rest next week just to prep for the course and to make sure that I'm spacious before we start. So we'll skip an episode next week, listen to some of my past episodes, and I'll meet you the week after that. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed this episode and got a lot out of it. Like I said, as I was writing it, I got really weepy, and there's a little part of me that wants to keep my privacy, but I also know that I was meant to be a storyteller, and I really do take a lot of pride in what I've gone through. And so if it serves you, then I feel like I've done what I meant to do. And that's all. Have a wonderful rest of your day, rest of your week, and I look forward to catching you in the next episode. Take care. Bye for now.
Thanks so much for listening to the Anxious Love Coach today. If you loved this episode, please hit that subscribe button, leave a review, and follow me on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, and maybe share it with someone that you believe might benefit from these perspectives. Please also subscribe to my email list at www.anxiouslovecoach.com, as I'm trying to reduce my reliance on social media. In exchange, you will receive my free relationship anxiety meditation and more supportive tools sent your way. If you would like to work with me, head on over to my website at, again, anxiouslovecoach.com to explore different tiers of coaching options and online programs. Thanks again for listening, and catch you in the next episode. Have a blessed day.